Hey, when I teach my face-to-face class, for the last about 10 years, I've always made it a practice to wear a Hawaiian shirt on Friday. It's a Hawaiian shirt Friday tradition. I have my face-to-face classes do video projects, and I call the combined project Hawaiian Shirt History. So I'm going to go ahead and step up my game here for the Western Civ classes and start wearing Hawaiian shirts to do these lectures. So that's the wardrobe issue. As we begin our new chapter, the topic for this is imperialism, and the new imperialism. It's not like Europeans didn't do imperialism before, but now they've had to step up their game a little bit. Some of the previous chapters help to explain it. The success of the Industrial Revolution, the unifications that have come about, and the growth of government power, along with the expenses that come with that. The fact that now these industrialized nations can produce much more than they consume, and so they need new markets. And they want to produce many things that they don't have the natural resources for at home, so they need to secure those. All of these factors are driving the advanced Western nations of Europe and the United States out into the world, searching for markets, searching for resources, and really looking for exclusive privileges. The place that sprang to mind for all of the European powers was China. China had been, in the vision of would-be wealthy Europeans, an unlimited land of opportunity. The China market had taken on mythical perspective, that it was an untapped source of customers, along with untold wealth and resources. So everybody wants to get a piece of China. Now, some areas have already got their interests in. The British and the French already have interest in China, the British especially, and the British start off the 19th century in less than impressive ways. The problem that the British had found was they had lots of goods that they wanted from China. They loved the porcelainware, they loved teakwood products, they loved tea. They were a nation of tea drinkers. And they had lots of different things that they wanted to import from the Chinese. Silk and finery, a lot of high-end goods. Turns out, though, the Chinese weren't that interested in importing things from them. The one thing that the British stumbled across that they could sell to the Chinese regularly, though, was opium. And when the British moved into India and seized the northern portion of India and the region around Pakistan, Afghanistan, they acquired the world's leading producer of opium. And so the British literally blast open the doors of Chinese trade in order to ship opium. Not only do the Chinese consume opium, they consume enough opium that the balance of trade literally shifts. Where in the past the British had imported far more from the Chinese than what they exported, and therefore were sending a lot of silver to the Chinese, the whole trade turns around, and China's now importing all the opium that Britain will send them, and sending silver back to the British Empire, which is a situation that they love, the British. When the Chinese government tries to shut this all down, Britain sends in the troops, literally sends in the Navy. A British company, the British East India Company, was behind much of this. In fact, they had their own private army, they had an enormous economy of their own. They were a company that was almost too big to fail in modern terms. And when they needed to do something, the British government usually supported it. In the 1830s and the 1840s, what this meant was wars with the Chinese government to open up those trading venues. Wars that they won in a big way. The Manchu dynasty, the last of the imperial dynasties of China, was really in its old age by this point and was becoming a weakened, real compromised power. The British are going to help facilitate that process. And as a result of the Opium Wars, they're going to grab some really sweet real estate like Shanghai and Hong Kong, and they're going to open the door for other Western imperializers to try and move in. A Chinese response to this is an anti-Westerners sort of violent revolution. In the 1850s, the rebellion is called the Taiping Rebellion. It lasts for almost a decade. It's massively destructive. It results in millions of people dying. It's largely focused internally, though. The Taiping Rebellion is meant to get the Manchus, who are seen as not truly Chinese, as those foreigners out and sort of purify China from the inside. By the end of the century, by 1900, the Chinese have decided that all the outsiders need to go, because you've had pylons from the French, from the Germans, from the Americans, from the Japanese, from the Italians, from every European power wants a piece of China, and they want exclusive trading rights, and they want these great relationships. The Boxer Rebellion is a massive armed revolt against all things foreign. The interesting part is that the foreign powers actually team up in order to put the Boxer Rebellion down. In many ways, the rivalry between these European empires is really starting to heat up. But in terms of making sure they can stay at the China table, they're willing to cooperate. Now, south of China, in Indochina, in the nations today of Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, this becomes almost exclusively a French province. And this is part and parcel of what's happening in lots of areas in Asia, is that later comers, the French, the Germans, Italians, Portuguese to a lesser extent, the Americans especially, the Japanese, are going to be grabbing the areas that are left over by this point. Any place that hasn't been taken by the British, any place that hasn't already been spoken for. And French Indochina becomes a very lucrative resource for France, one of their key empires points in Asia. They'll focus a lot more in Africa, but Indochina is their spot in Asia. Finally, the latecomer to all of this is going to be Japan. Japan is an Asiatic nation that sort of sees the handwriting on the wall after the Opium Wars. They don't want that to happen to them. They go through what they call a restoration, the Meiji Restoration. They re-empower the emperor, who had sort of been in a forced retirement while the shogun ran things. But the shogun is done away with. Some of the sharper, more progressive samurai are going to seize power. They're going to re-elevate the emperor, and they're going to begin a fast-paced modernization process. They're going to take on what they see as some of the best elements of the West. They're going to take on the economy. They're going to take on the military. They're going to emulate these Western examples. And by the 1890s, the Japanese are ready for their coming out party. The Japanese have decided that they're going to be a regional power. They sort of see themselves like the Prussia of East Asia, that they will unify the Asians around themselves. They fight a war with the Chinese in 1894-95, which results in Japan getting the island of Formosa. It's a massive success. And then in 1904-1905, they shock the world, really, by fighting a war with Russia over some of the territory in Manchuria and Korea, and dealing the Russians a pretty embarrassing series of defeats. They can't absolutely knock the Russians out, but they sink two separate Russian fleets and fight a bloody and protracted war in Manchuria on the ground. All of this by way of opening up a series of rivalries as these modern European nations, and now the United States and the Japanese, get into this industrialized, competitive, global economy. It's going to set the stage for the rivalries that will eventually bring the old system crashing down.